So, Furi. I have, on more than one occasion already, described this game completely straight-faced as infuriating. It was nearly joyless because of the incorrect expectations I had, assuming that it would be similar to the games that the developers have cited as their personal inspirations, with development teams like Clover, Platinum, Koji Pro, and Treasure. They may get inspiration from games made by those teams and people, but this game is absolutely its own thing. It's not a shmup, and it's not a combat game like DMC, it's just its own thing. That said, I'm still going to review it according to how I felt about it. The biggest issue I personally have with the game is that the combat is not about a back and forth exchange, testing both your tactics and execution. It's just about gaining the ability to jump through the pre-designed hoops of the game, and then learning how to do that more efficiently. The game forces you to play in turns, which wouldn't be bad if there was more to it. Even in DMC, or literally any other action game like that, there are periods where you can't attack enemies and simply have to wait your turn. Thing is, the best games of those types have techniques, tactics, or methods with which to, if you're skilled enough, both force your turn to start and then keep your own turn going for as long as you're able to keep your execution up. This is what separates those games from just being a matter of course, and instead makes the player the deciding factor in how the battle proceeds, not just how it ends. This also means that the player must actually learn how to use the battle system to enforce their own will upon the game, instead of just accepting the systems on a superficial level. Getting deeper than that initial superficiality gives rise to tactics the player comes up with on their own, which leads to better survivability and a better sense of achievement. This game does not have that emphasis on the player imposing their will on the game. There are ways to bring about your turn quicker, but there are tons of uninterruptible, unskippable states that force you to play a reactionary game only. There are very few ways or instances in which you can be proactive, and there are entire phases designed around you not being allowed to affect the enemy at all until its turn is over. And even in those times where you can take the lead, you don't get a better reward for it than you do if you waited and punished after. The only reward is that they're not attacking you while you hit them, I suppose. To be clear, you can maximize damage beyond the simple 4-hit combo, but the ceiling beyond that is very small and reachable with only a little practice. There's no room for executional skill to be used to maximize your opportunities, because you can learn very quickly how to do that, and at that point you've already reached the skill ceiling. There just isn't much room for player creativity. The game tests your reflexes and positioning, and almost nothing else. Generally, every phase of a boss works like this. First, there's a long-range phase, and then a close combat phase. Taking them down in both phases results in them losing one life bar. This continues until either you or the enemy character loses all their life bars. Many bosses have little exceptions, such as no close combat phase, or no long-range phase, or only some phases of the battle having both, or whatever. The initial phase of most battles is a shmup-like section of combat. There's a dash mechanic which has some invincibility on it, used to get through attacks, and a normal shot or a charge shot used to destroy some of the weak attacks. Using those in conjunction, you survive these bullet hell-like sections while damaging the enemy when you get a chance. These sections are not so bad as to be unplayable or anything, but it just kind of has a very sloppy feel to it, with not very well defined hitboxes for enemy attacks or for your own character's hitbox. I never really found any of these sections enjoyable to play. Once you damage them enough to move to the close combat phase, it becomes a little bit more like the games made by the development teams I mentioned earlier, in that you need to, in various ways, defend from their attacks and counterattack. But even here, where you might feel it should be your turn for surviving those long-range sections, the game itself tells you that the preferred way to play is to wait and punish. Which, again, is not a bad thing, except that that's basically all there is to it. In these phases too, there are many uninterruptible attacks, and in the neutral, they'll block normal attacks and dodge charge attacks with some very few exceptions. So no matter what, you're mostly just waiting for when the developer says it's okay to attack, instead of learning how to make your turn come with your own ability. It's not too inaccurate to describe this game as a relatively pretty puzzle game that requires some reactionary ability and speed, rather than comparing it to a shmup or a close combat game, I think. I just don't find the game very exciting after one playthrough. I'm not even interested in seeing any more of it. Still, all that said, if you have no expectations, you can definitely still enjoy the game for what it is, just don't expect highly compelling combat or long-lasting depth, because I don't think you'll find it here.